Hello everyone and welcome to the logins and logout lecture. Once a user is registered, we want to make sure that they can log in and log out from the site. In this lecture, we will go through the entire process of creating login and logout functionality for users that are registered in our database. This process involves the following main criteria. We need to set up special login views and also show you how you can create views for access, and we can do that with built-in decorators. So a lot of that functionality Django makes really easy for you. Things like making sure certain views requires a login can all be done with a simple decorator call. Then we also need to make sure to add in the login URL and our settings.py file. We need to actually create the login page, and then we want to edit the urls.py file to actually match the URL mapping to our login.html. Okay, let's get started. This is our code editor, that is Atom, but you can do that also in any code editor like PyCharm. So we want to one dedicated page for the user to log in form. So what we are going to do is going to set into settings.py file and scroll all the way down on this. So I can actually go all the way down, and at the bottom what we are going to do is just like we added a static URL and media URL. I'm going to add one more variable in here called login underscore each URL and set it equal to the login page. In our case, that's going to go under the basic app folder under templates, and then we will call this user login. So we will save that and file that under settings.py into that setting. The next thing we can do is set up our HTML files. So coming back to basic app, we have our base HTML and our login HTML, and we are going to play around with both of these. The base HTML to actually add in the login link and logout, but for the login HTML we can start with that right away. So first we want to actually extend, so we will say extends, and this extends from basic app slash base.html, and then we will call the body block here, and after that we also add the end block also. Okay, so we'll say here end block. Okay, and then what we are going to do is call a container class. Actually I don't believe we need to do that because the base calls a container on the body itself. We can go directly into a jumbotron class, and this is just going to be where the user can log in. So let's put a header in here that says please log in. And if you were doing this on your own website, and you could add a button that takes you to the registration page that says something like register here. But let's start our website. Let's create a form, and the form we don't need to have a class for now. And what we are going to do is actually show you how you can play around with the action this time. Okay, so we are going to do is on the action I will call a URL template tag, and I'm going to pass in basic app and then user underscore login. This is the thing. So the URL template tag is going to go to basic app user login, and this will make more sense when we actually see it in the views. But keep it in mind for now. But so we'll come back to this later. And then with any form, remember we need the CSRF token. So we'll type in CSRF underscore token, and then let's create some labels here. So this is going to use kind of more HTML style form because we don't actually create a form for the login, and at least we did not in our case. So let's create a username and then we'll say username. Okay, so that's the label for the username. Hopefully, this feels really familiar, kind of like a blast from the past from the HTML section of the course. Username is just a text, and then we'll give it the name username so it matches up with that label, and then it doesn't need a value, but we can give it a placeholder. The placeholder can say enter username into that box, and then we are going to do is create another entry for the actual password. So we'll say for password, then we'll have that person type in their password there, and then we will give it an input of password, call it password, and it doesn't need a value, and it doesn't need a placeholder because it's a password. Sure. So that is the thing. And then finally, we'll have an input for submit. So we'll give it the value of login. All right. And this is actually basically all we are going to have in our login page. So a couple of things here. We are using a lot of the HTML that we learned about for actually grabbing the information we are importing. Okay. And we are also importing forms, the forms.py file, because it is such a basic form, and also we are calling a form to action. So note here we are calling URL basic app user login, and we'll show why we do that later on. And then we are also going to be playing around with the base HTML file. What we are going to do is inside of the base HTML file, we would not do it yet, but we will come back to this later. We will have a link that either says login or logout depending on if the person who has already registered is logged into your site or not. But to do all of this, we really need to start focusing on the views.py file, and that's again where a lot of the logic is going to be taken place, and that's where we are going to be doing the majority of our coding for the actual lecture. So let's go over to user.py and our basic app, and we are going to be typing a lot here, so be prepared for it. So first thing, we are going to do a lot of import because we are going to be using a lot of Django's built-in functionality. So we will say from django.contrib uh, .url URL resolvers import reverse, and we'll show how to use that in just a little bit. But then this actually should not be from contrib, this should be from core. There we go. So from Django core URL resolvers import reverse, and now we are going to say from change django.contrib.auth uh, decorators, we need to import login require. If you ever want a view or to require the user to be logged in, you can decorate it with this login underscore required. And Django has a bunch of authorization decorators that really help you out like that. The main one being login and required. And then we are going to do is to keep things a little more simple. Instead of using render, we will use the http response, and we will also do an http response redirect, which we may not have been before, but we will say from django.http import http response. Okay, redirect, comma, We also include HTTP response. Okay, so we have already seen this a bunch of times, especially back in the beginning, but we have not seen redirect. So we'll see that as well now. And then finally we'll say from Django.contrib for authorization import. And then here are the three kind of key functions which are authenticate, login and logout. All right. And now let's actually go and create our login view for the user login page, and then we will show you how to use this decorator to show you kind of like a simple example of some pages where the user login is required. So let's start off by going all the way down here under register and creating a new view, going to put in a bunch of new lines here, and we will collapse the directory tree. Give us a little more room and we'll say def user underscore login, and I will pass in request. And as a quick note, sometimes Django can contain, if you decide to call your review login, especially if you are importing, if you scroll all the way up here, if you are importing login and then you don't want to overwrite it here in the views file. So make sure that the view doesn't share a name with anything you are importing. So don't call a view authenticate login or logout or login required. So here try to make it something a little more unique. So here we are calling it user underscore login, and then this is actually going to look pretty similar to the request. It is lot of code, so excuse me, pretty similar to the registration, and it's a lot of code, but it will get the job done. So we'll say request method. If request method is equal to post, then the user has actually filled out the login information. So the first thing we need to do is get the username and password that's supplied. So I will grab from the request dot post, and I can use the dot get method and get the name of that. So the reason I use the get is because over in our login HTML file we are just using simple HTML, and we called it name equals username. So I am going to get from that post username, and then I am going to create a variable called password is equal to request dot post dot get password. Okay, and then we are going to use Django's built-in authentication function, and this makes your life really easy. So all the work of the authentication is going to happen for you automatically. So we'll say user authenticate, and then we pass in username equal to username, and then the password equal to password. And again, sometimes Django complains if you just pass in username password. So actually tell it the variable username is equal to username, password is equal to password. So type in that what the parameters are equal to, and this will basically automatically authenticate this user for you, which is awesome. One line of code. Thank you. And then if we have a user, so I will say if user, so remember user is going to check if they are actually right here authenticated, when what I am going to do is check if the account is active. So later on, especially in the clones, we will talk about deactivating users if they have spent too much time off the site, or having them reactivate their accounts in case they lost their password. But right now we'll say if they are a user, so they pass the authentication process, and then if the user is active, we are going to log the user in. and that again is one simpler function. Thanks to a lot of the built-in stuff of Django, we just say login in that function, we import it, and then passing the request, and then pass through the passing the user object that was returned by authenticate, and then we are going to send that user back to some page. So once they are logged in, you send them somewhere. Sometimes it will be their own profile page, their home page, etc. And we use HTTP response redirect to redirect to them some other page, and we can redirect them and call reverse on index page. And basically what this is going to do is going to do a redirect. If the login and it's successful and their account is active, it will reverse them and redirect them back to the home page. And then in the else, so if their account is not active, we will return http response and it would not be redirect. So they will just be a response and we will give them something back like accounts not active, and then on this if user call we can say else, and then so we might want to print something out just for us in the console. So something like someone tried to log in and failed. So and we can also print if you want to username. So again this is very simple site, so you probably would not want to do something so direct on your site, but I am going to print out maybe someone malicious tried to log in with a username and password, but it was not right. So he could either print this out straight into the console or have some sort of error log. And we will talk about logging later on in this course. We can say something like print username and password, format username and password. So this will basically be what they tried to log in with. Now it's not so bad that we print it out because technically this username and password combination is not already in our database, and then we'll say return an HTTP response of invalid login details. So else, which means the request method was not equal to post, so they have not actually submitted anything. Then we just return the actual render of the request, and then the login page, which is basic app slash login.html, and we can pass in just an empty contact dictionary if you want. So we'll save that and then should be ready to go for user login. Now what I want to show you is imagine what a page would look like if you want to require the login. So we'll scroll all the way up and add two more functions here. It's kind of up to you where you want to add these views. And if you get over pile of views here, sometimes some people separate them into different views and then import them all here. But right now we are keeping things so basic that we'll just add in two more views. These are much smaller, but we want a log out. So we'll call this the user underscore logout. We don't want to call it just logout because if you notice we imported logout, so we'll call it user underscore logout instead. This takes in a request, and what this happens is you pass in the request to that built-in logout function, and that automatically logs out the user, and then we return an HTTP response redirect. So reverse back to the index page, and so pretty simple except for one thing. We want to make sure that only a user who is logged in can log out. The way we have it right now is a little confusing because it doesn't actually require a user to be logged in order to log out. So this would probably cause some issues and problems with the page. And this is what really awesome about Django in order to make sure that any view requires a person to be logged in to see it. All you do is decorate it with this log and required that we import it. So you say at the at review the decorators lecture if you don't remember how to do this, but you just call it directly above the function and it has to be directly. So one line above. So if I own 16, it should be at 15 line. Login required. So here we see at login required and now suddenly this entire view has a login required. So let's imagine that you had some sort of a special page or you want to return something special just to kind of reiterate this. You have some other page that requires a login and you can say something like return an HTTP response that says you are logged in. Nice. And all you have to do is say in order to make sure that view requires a login, pass in and logging required as a decorator. And that's what's pretty awesome about Django. The fact that authenticate login and logout and required are super easy to call. It's just a function call for login and logout, and it's just a decorator for logging required. And that's really what going to save you a ton of time when you are developing your own web application. I know the process to actually understand how to use those takes a long time, but once you understand how to use them, the process of using them definitely shortens your development cycle. So views.py should be taken care of now. Let's go and make sure our URLs actually point to the user login page. So let's come back to our URLs in our project and scroll all the way down. And what we can do here in add in something for in this index page, let's say the logout page and that special page, we just kind of made that silly view. So we'll do something for logout since that's actually what we are going to be using and we will say logout slash dollar sign. Okay, that is the regular expression term, but you need to change it into the path method according to the latest Django division, and we will give it the name equals to logout. And if you want to see an example of setting that special view that someone requires to be logged in, and as a practice problem, if you want, you can set another HTML to go to this special page, but we will say special slash views. The special name is equal to special. So that's some sort of special page that we have not really done anything with that. Theoretically, a user would have to be logged in to even see this page. So that's what the project would look like. Now, as far as the URLs is up, the main thing to note that we added is this logout page of the user. Let's come to our project or uh, come to our application inside the urls.py file. Right now we only have that register view. What I want to add in the login view, so we'll say URL, okay, r user login dollar sign, and then I am going to say views.user underscore login, and we'll give it the name user underscore that is the login. So save that and now our URL patterns is done. So we have something pointing to the login page and the logout page. But what I am going to do before we actually get started is come to that base HTML, and over here add in another link with some logic to have the user either log in or log out once they have registered. And the way we are going to do that is I am going to zoom out just a teeny bit and also collapse this directory tree to get a little more room here so I can show you what I am going to be doing. So I want some logic to actually display one more list item, which means I am going to use template text. So I have Django, I have admin, I have registered, and I am going to say this: if user is authenticated, let me make sure I will write correctly. Uh, Authenticated, correct spelling. And basically, what this says is the user passed that authentication function that we called in the view. So if you go back to view and scroll all the way down to the login, so here's user, right, and then here is authenticate. And what we are going to say is if that user is authenticated, then we are going to do something here. I will add in a list item to that navbar. It's going to be an anchor tag and it will have the same class. The class will be navbar, the link, and then the reference is going to be this. Okay, so this is the list link, the navbar. Let's make sure we do this right. A URL template tag to logout, and if we look back at our project, so under learning user, we have logout. Here its name is logout. So that's what we are pointing to here under our template tagging. So URL logout, and then let's give it some actual text. Text which says logout. So let's imagine that the user was not authenticated. Then I'm going to say create a list item, create an anchor, and we will give it the reference. Well, let's give it the class so it looks the same as everything else. That's again a navbar link, and it is going to have an of your URL. So it's another URL template, and it goes to the basic app and it finds the user login view. Okay, so basically, remember in the URLs file for application over here, we name this user login and it is under our basic app. And that leads the actual user login view for the URL mapping, which means I need to add one more line of code here, and hopefully you guessed it, it's the end. It's the end of the complete file. And if so, whenever you have an if, you need to have an and if, and I'm not using any sort of plugins that help me auto complete Django, and I definitely suggest those on your computer, on your editor, please use that. That will help you very much. So when I am not doing this, you will also explore if I am not doing this. I definitely have a lot of plugins that do special autocomplete and highlighting syntax here. So let's add one line of text here that says login, and save this. Let's run the server and see if we actually got everything to work, and we will debug if we have any error. Okay, so then let's start typing python manage.py run server. So when you hit enter, that's good news. We have not any error. It's actually attempting to run something. Okay, so when I am going to do is bring that here, this URL in our browser to make sure that the work. And so I can actually remember how this person is going to log in. So we will create a username. We'll call him any name like Semi. Okay. Email address semi@gmail.com. We'll give him a test password and then their portfolio site. We can just provide one, doesn't really matter. So we will give it google.com, anything. So you can upload a picture. So let actually get some practice uploading a picture. So they choose file and let's upload this picture of the GitHub logo and let's register. So it says thank you for registering. That looks good. Let's log in and as admin and verify that that person registered successfully or not. So you need to put in your super username and then the password and check the profile of Semi. And here we can see they have their profile pic and they are at google.com for their profile portfolio site. So we'll log out. Okay. Now let's go back to the home page and let's log in as Semi. So it says enter username. We'll type in Semi and then let's enter the test password. We should be redirected to the home page and note that what else happened. So now that this changed to logout, if I click on login again, it changes to login. We can also have that redirect to another page if we wanted, but when I can hit login and I see the logout change, great. And then I can always click logout and that can redirect to some sort of thank you for visiting page. And that's basically all there is for logging in and logging out later on in some of the clone project. We'll also talk about sessions, but maybe a good exercise for you is to see if you can have a link and create a navbar link to the special page that we created. So we create a view called special and linked it in the URLs, but we never actually really did anything with it. It was just a check that someone had to be logged in to see it. This entire process of creating users, having them log in and log out, register and creating sessions for each user is something we are going to explore a lot more during the our clone project. So we'll definitely get a lot more practice with this, but hopefully so the very basics are actually quite simple. Thank you for joining us.